Okay, we're good? We're rolling? Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Safari Pedals Show. I'm your host, Abby. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Safari Podcast Zoo YouTube Crazy Thing Wild bandwagon. It's great to have you. Guys, it has been a hot minute, but we are back with the 5 Mistakes and 5 Tips mini-series.
This is my favorite one so far. Nice job, team.
I've really missed doing these episodes. I will say on a personal note that I've really tried to internalize and put the advice that I've gotten from these episodes into action, and it's really helped me so far, mindset-wise, career-wise. So I'm really excited to listen and to learn more, which brings me to our amazing guest for today's episode. Mr. Leslie Brathwaite is going to be on the show, and we are going to be diving into the mistakes that have shaped his audio journey, mistakes that he sees in up-and-coming producers and engineers that he wants to call attention to, and tips he also has for people like myself that are just starting out, getting their audio bandwagon on. And I feel like there's not much more I can add to this intro. So guys, please give a very warm Safari welcome to Mr. Leslie Brathwaite. Welcome
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. Safari Pedals. I even put my little sticker on my water bottle.
Hey, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for hopping on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Before we get to the questions and everything, let's first start with who you are, what you do, and we'll take it from there.
So my name is Leslie Brathwaite. I am a mix engineer, and for those of you who may not know what that means, I am the guy who, once the music is recorded, there's a recording engineer, there's producers, there's artists, all that process takes place, and once they get everything recorded, they send it to me, and I have to kind of mix it. I have to decide if the drums are going to be loud, the bass is going to be low. Every now and then, artists, more often than not, artists do, quite a few takes of the same verse. I have to kind of go through and pick through and figure out which word we use here, and just make it a cohesive sound and bring it all together. And yeah, that's my job. I listen to records for a living, and I love it. And sometimes there's even a little bit of production involved in my job where I'm trying to piece things together and make things sound good and people trust my ear. I've been doing this for over 30 years or somewhere in there. I graduated from Full Sail University back in 1992. I was born in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, went to Full Sail, moved to Atlanta, been here ever since. Been fortunate to be a huge part of a lot of the southern trap music sound, developing that sound, working with, amazing producers and artists like, Dallas Austin, Manny Fresh, Pharrell, quite a few, heavy hitters in the industry, and just fortunate to work with great talent. And yeah, this is what I do, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia.
That's amazing. What got you into audio in the first place?
My love of music, the journey kind of was equal to the journey of my love of mixing and engineering. And so what I mean by that is my dad, I grew up in the Virgin Islands, a very musical culture. You'll always, for carnival season, you'll hear a lot of calypso and reggae, but of course I was a hip hop head, so I loved hip hop. And my dad had the craziest record collection. It was so eclectic. You would pull out a Bob Marley record, and then right next to the Bob Marley record is a Led Zeppelin record, and then right next to that is Roberta Flack. And so my dad's musical palette, I think, kind of helped inform mine, because I would just sit there and listen to the records. I just loved music. It's funny, I believe I fell in love with music at such a young age because I don't remember actually falling in love with it. I just remember always loving music. So a thing I would do when I was in grade school, when I was a young kid, all the way up to high school, I would sneak out so my dad and my mom got divorced. So I lived with my mom, but my dad left all his records in the turntable and these really big headphones that look like pilots wear them. He left that collection. So every night when my mom goes to sleep, I would sneak out into the living room. This is like school nights. I would be out in the living room till like 4 or 5 in the morning, just listening to records on my headphones. And I would just be listening to sounds and listening to records and reading back of credits. And it was like, I quickly discovered that was like my happy place. Like, I just loved listening to records. I loved dissecting sounds. I also think that process of listening in headphones is what informed my love for mixing, because when you experience music in headphones, it's a very different experience. Like I'm listening to Al Green records and they'll put like a whole drum kit over here and like all the guitars would be over here. Or like I'm listening to certain records and I'll be like, ooh. So I started getting into the sound of things, even in that process of loving music. I also got into the process of just technically loving music. And then the way my brain worked, I was very technical, always had a very technical mind. My mom would give me, gifts I would always ask for a keyboard or a drum machine or something technical. And anything I got, I would take it apart to its barest form and then put it back together. That was just my thing. She would give me a turntable. I would take that thing apart into a million pieces and then put it back together. Cause I think my brain always wanted to see how things work. So that was just, yeah. And so that's pretty much how I got into and fell in love with music and with mixing at the same time.
That's awesome. It was like from like the youngest age, it was like always your thing. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I'm really pumped to dive right in. Guys, we're back again with the mistakes and the tips. And so yes. So it'll divide into two. I think let's start with one, mistakes that you've made over the course of your audio journey that you've learned from, and then let's move over to mistakes you see in young producers and engineers starting out that you'd like to call attention to as well.
I think one of the biggest mistakes I made early in my career as a young engineer, and this is something I also see a lot of people make, but this is one of the biggest mistakes I think I made. I was fortunate enough to kind of develop a certain mindset early, but I did make a couple mistakes. And one of the big mistakes I made, I started taking things too personal when I was a young engineer. So I didn't realize how important other people's feedback and creative participation was. And I used to take it personal when somebody said they didn't like something or I had to change something. I quickly got over that, though, when I realized that's a part of the process. And that's a part of what makes this a beautiful process is we all have input. You're just because somebody doesn't like something you did, it's not an indictment on your talent, that kind of thing. So I quickly had to learn not to take things personal. It's a mistake I see a lot of young people doing now, where they take criticism very personal. When people, artists, I think in general, artists, producers, creatives tend to focus too much on the results. I've heard it most beautifully put by Rick Rubin, where he talks a lot about how, as a creative, you pay attention to what you put into it, but you don't pay attention to how it's going to be received, because that's not my responsibility. That's not our responsibility. And so I see a lot of young people they put so much pain into how a thing is received, and they take it personal when people don't like their art, or, so that's a thing I think I learned to get over early, is not to take things personal, put everything I have into the art, just service the art. My good buddy Guru, I love that he always speaks about just servicing the art. Whatever decisions we're making, whatever feelings we have, whatever effort we put into it, service the art. Make sure all your decisions are around what makes this the best piece of art. So I think that's a mistake I made early, where I was always thinking about what other people thought, how it was received, that kind of thing. The other mistake is a little bit removed from that. And it's a practical thing, and it's something that I see a lot of young people doing now, and I try to talk about it. I'm not ashamed of it, but I try to talk about it so that people don't make this mistake. Going into my finances, I didn't button up the things I needed to button up business-wise at first, because I was so, I was in a studio and I was making money, and I started making a little more money as an assistant engineer and a recording engineer. And that money started coming in, and I started spending and didn't realize, I'm an independent contractor. I got to pay taxes. So it's those kind of practical things that I wish I had learned earlier, but I learned. I messed up and the IRS came knocking and I had to pay a big bill. But I always talk about it because I want to make sure that young people and younger people coming after me pay attention to that kind of stuff too, and really pay attention to the fact that you are a business and you do have to pay taxes and you do have to handle your finances well. And we do, I have years where I can make a ton of money, and then the following year I hardly make any money because all the people I was working with one year, the next year they're out on tour. So now nobody's making albums. And, you know, so you have to also manage the fluctuation of your income. And a lot of times when you're making a lot of money, your mind can trick you into thinking you'll always be making this much money all the time. And you don't realize there's, you know, so I had to learn early there's droughts. And I had to learn to manage my money when I'm making a lot of money. Don't spend everything. Don't go buy all the Jordans. Just maybe buy like one pair of Jordans, you know, that kind of thing. So those are things that I think that's a practical thing that a mistake that I made. And I'm trying to think of other mistakes I made. Like I said, I think I was fortunate and blessed to develop the right mindset early. Not saying I'm perfect. I just, you know, listed two huge mistakes I made, but I developed a good mindset early to where I was able to kind of course correct. One thing I do, there's another practical thing I see a lot of young engineers, a huge mistake. People who come right out of school or it's their first time in a recording studio, you know, just the simple things like just talking too much, saying the wrong thing at the wrong time can be a huge mistake. It could be literally a career ender. It could be that thing where you finally get the opportunity to be around the artist or producer that you really wanted to be around, and you get in that environment and then you start talking too much. And those soft skills are important. And I see a lot of young people who may be skilled technically. They may know how to push all the buttons and do all the things, but they don't understand the cadence of the soft skills of knowing when to speak, knowing how to read the room when somebody has an attitude or somebody's not having a bad day, knowing how to navigate that. That's a skill that is so important to what we do because it's all about the vibe. It's all about, you know, how the atmosphere for that person to create or navigate their creation. So that's a huge mistake I see too. A lot of people just talking out of turn, not knowing when to speak, not knowing what to say, that kind of thing.
It's so interesting that you touched on that as something that's really an issue with up and coming people, because all of the engineers and producers I've spoken to that do this full time as their career have said that that's the biggest issue. And it's like, if it keeps on being said over and over, then we should probably be paying a lot more attention.
Yes, it is. and with a lot of my peers and colleagues and contemporaries, it is one of the number one things that just drives people crazy is young people coming in, and you may know a thing or you may see an error or see a mistake, but you have to also know when to say it, when to point it out. You have to know when to ask your question. You have to know when, you know, that cadence is so important in a creative environment because throwing off the mood can be everything. And I'll piggyback this on to that mistake. It's not just knowing when to speak and when not to speak. It's knowing how to be, which is even the practical things. Like I tell students this all the time when I speak at like Full Sail University or Berkeley, even the simplest thing, like, man, just take a shower. Like, nobody wants to be in a room with somebody for 24 hours and they don't smell good. So when you don't present personal hygiene, all that stuff matters. And I always tell the young people, they overlook that stuff because they're so excited to be in these environments. Man, take a shower before you show up. Make sure you smell good. Make sure you can learn a lot in a room if you just sit there, pay attention. And I think even attached to this, there's another crucial mistake I see people make all the time. And we this is a societal thing, but it definitely focuses on our industry. One of the biggest tragedies of learning is people tend to only want to learn what they think they need to learn. So they come into an environment and they walk into a studio and they want to be Leslie Brathwaite. They want to be the guy, the mix engineer. So the only thing they pay attention to is what I'm doing. And they only pay attention to what buttons I push. And what they don't realize is everything that's happening in that room is important to your career advancing. The conversations, when you're allowed to sit in a room, I can't tell you how many times I've been in rooms like with Whitney Houston or Eric Sermon, or, you know, early in my career, and like Whitney will get on the phone and start talking to Clive Davis, and I'll be like, oh, let me excuse myself. And she'd be like, oh, no, honey, you don't have to go anywhere. And I'll be like, yes, because now I'm getting to hear a conversation about making records, A&Rs, dealing with promo, All those things, when you have the opportunity to listen to those conversations, they're so valuable and they're so important because you understand how people navigate the music industry. You understand egos. You understand how to deal with certain artists. You understand what pisses an artist off. You understand all these things that can be so vital to how you navigate your world. And that's one of the biggest human tragedies, in my opinion, is people only tend to want to learn the things they think they need to know. And if you pay attention to everything going on in that room, you can learn so much.
And it sounds like that's kind of the key to really sustaining a career, like those like nuances.
Absolutely. And even again, away from topics that you don't even think are relevant. Like if I have an assistant in the room and I'm having a conversation with my wife and I said, no, you could stay. And I'm talking about going over the kid's schedule and balancing work, and all that stuff is valuable too, because one day you will have a family and you will have to learn how to balance your work and your life. And those are a lot of the questions I get. A ton of times I get questions about, well, how do you balance your wife and kids with your work schedule? And those are the things that are valuable too. It's not just coming in and figuring out, well, what button did you push, or what knob did you turn, or what, Safari plugin did you use? Yes, that stuff is valuable. But what I always tell people, the two things that are the most valuable in any space is all of the things you don't think you need to learn. And when instead of asking what plugin I used, ask me why I used it. So instead of saying, well, which plugins did you use? Say, well, why did you use that one? And why did you make that decision? The why is always going to be more important. So those two things, the why and everything you don't think you need to learn, soak it all up.
That's fantastic. There seems to be, and I'm so new to the music industry in general, but just from like my first impressions, there seems to be like, at least for my generation, such a huge emphasis on like the what and not the why. And I also wonder, like, I want to hear like your take. Is it like a generational thing of specifically this, or has it always been the case?
Well, I think what happens is, I think the way kids, especially, I have two kids. My girls are 11 and 14, and I watch them navigate how they learn. And of course, they soak up a lot of their information from TikTok, from the internet, from all these sources. And a lot of times what happens in a world where everything is focused on visual, your brain focuses on the what. Your brain focuses on, well, what does Leslie Brathwaite have in his arsenal to be able to mix? What plugins is he using? What equipment is he using? What speakers is he using? And I'm not saying that stuff isn't valuable, but I think just the way our society is built now, because it's a very visual, interactive, immersive type of culture, the what gets focused on. And what I always try to preach is just as important, and sometimes even more important, is the why. Why did I make a certain decision? Is going to be probably more important than what plugin I'm using. Because if you answer the why, several plugins can apply to the same why. A lot of times they get hyper focused on the gear and the plugin. And I always say, don't focus on the gear. Yes, it's important to learn things, but focus on the craft. Which brings me, I'm going to segue to something, but I'm coming back to another topic. Which brings me to one of the reasons why I love Safari pedals. And this is not specific to Safari pedals. It's any plugin or plugin company that focuses on simplifying the process. Because the problem is when things are too complicated and there are too many knobs and buttons, you focus on the what. You think the thing that has a gajillion buttons is doing something amazing, as opposed to the plugin that has a gorilla on the front and has like 3 knobs. That plugin is probably doing a very amazing thing because it just simplified. Here's the thing that really affects what you're trying to hear. So I was a huge fan. I remember when the one knob series came out. I was a huge fan of the one knob series. It's like you have one button to do one thing. And I feel the same way about Safari pedals, where you look at the plugin and there are simple terms to each button that you know what it does, and let's rock. And so that helps inform your why, as opposed to, well, what super complicated plugins are you using and da da da. I'm like, no, I use all the simple ones, the ones that translate in simple terms. So yeah, that's part of, my love affair with safari pedals. I wanted to point out one other thing before I forget it. There's another aspect to what a huge mistake I think a lot of young people make now, young engineers, young producers, is their brain always lives in the future. And they're always thinking about where they're trying to get. And I tell people so many times, focus on the thing that's right in front of you, even if it's not what you want to be doing. There's no truer space for this than in an internship. When you first, traditionally speaking, you first walk into a studio as an intern, you're going to be asked to clean the bathroom. You're going to be asked to, do all these tasks, go get food and all this stuff. And a lot of us had to do it. But what a lot of young people these days don't realize is it's not really about the thing I'm asking. Again, it's not the thing that I'm asking you that I'm focusing on. I'm focusing on how you do it. I'm focusing on the quality of your job, because if I ask you to clean a toilet and nobody likes cleaning toilets, but you do a great job, you do it with a great attitude, that informs me about how you might do when I say, hey, can you print my vocals? You may now you're doing something that you want to do, that you love doing, but the same principles will apply. You'll do a great job. You'll be thorough. Those things translate. And so the biggest test for interns for me is when I ask them to do things they don't want to do, I see how they do it. I see how they focus on detail, how well they do it. I was like that in my career. When I was an intern and I was interning at Dallas Austin Studio, I remember the very first time I ever even had an interaction with Dallas, I was in the room. I was an intern. Didn't touch any audio, nothing. And my job was to make sure all the spaces were clean and da-da-da. And he walked out of the bathroom one day and he goes, man, who cleaned the bathroom? These bathrooms are immaculate. And I'm sitting over there going, yes. Because I knew the minute he heard, oh, it's that intern Leslie, now I'm in his brain. And then the next opportunity I get to prove myself when I moved up to doing cassette dupes, cassette copies for you youngins, cassettes,
Cassettes.
I remember having those moments with Dallas throughout my career where one day I made a tape copy for him and he walks out and goes, man, who made this cassette? This sounds amazing. And I'm like, yes. So that's the thing I always try to teach people. It's how you do things translate to everything you do.
It's so interesting that you touched on that, and I loved everything you said, especially about living in the now. I actually just had this conversation with my mom, and she's like, that's your problem. So you pointing it out, guys, we gotta really take note of that. And like what you said is how you do one thing is how you do everything.
It becomes habit. And that's what you want to develop. You want to develop a cadence about how you do things, how you care about things, because it translates. And it's the reason why I'm sitting around working with Beyoncé or Pharrell or whoever, is because she can trust that, oh, Leslie's going to make sure he pays attention to the details. I met her when she was 12. And I remember one day she came in, she used to like those little Klondike bars. And she came into the studio and she goes, man, can I get somebody to get me some Klondike bars? And it took a while for the interns to get it, da-da-da. Well, the next day I had a bag full of them in a little freezer pack bag thing. And I kept it with me. As soon as she walked in, I handed it to her and she was like, she remembered that. And that was like the beginning of our friendship. This when she was 12 years old. It's about paying attention to details. And then that translates in her brain. And I'm sure she's not sitting around now going, oh, Leslie remembered to bring me Klondike bars. But what I'm saying is it sets a pattern of making sure I pay attention to details.
Again, it's just crazy how like the people that really do this full time, like this is kind of like, this is what they say is the key, yet everyone else, we're putting all the emphasis on the what and the plugins, and it's like the gap is crazy. One
of my favorite quotes ever, and I believe it's Maya Angelou. I don't want to misquote whoever originally said it, but I believe it's Maya Angelou, where she talks about people will forget a whole lot of things, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And that is such an important thing from a technical standpoint, as an engineer, as a producer. Because part of our job is we're developing a song that we want to make people feel something when they hear our music. But even more importantly, as we deal with our clients, how do we make our clients feel? nothing translates more than if I can make Beyonce feel comfortable, feel at home. You know, when Cardi B walks in, if she's having a bad day, I know how to address that immediately. Feed her. And it's knowing these things. So when people walk in and we're in the room and she goes, well, I'm hungry. And then the A&R comes over and starts to try to play the mixes. I'm like, whoa. Let's get her fed first. Let's get her some food. Because I know that's going to help her mood. You know, so you pay attention to people. You pay attention, you know, you always got to pay attention to how you make people feel. And it's it ties back into that knowing when to speak, knowing when not to speak. Because if you're an intern in a room with Jay-Z and he plays a track, and I've seen this happen where, you know, he's playing a track and the intern is in the room going, yeah, that one ain't dope. That's not dope. Like, first of all, nobody asked you. Second of all, you just made him feel a certain kind of way. Even though you think, oh, he's Jay-Z, he's super secure, da-da-da. Most artists are very insecure. Most artists rely on validation. That's their fuel. So even if you don't like it, there's a way to present that. And instead of saying to Beyonce, yeah, I didn't like that take, what I would say is, you know what? I think you can do it better. I think you got a better one in you. That's a different feeling than criticizing what she did. Instead, I approach it from motivating her to say, you can do better. So how you make people feel is super important.
And I love the reframing. Like, it's really in the nuances, like what you said. I think that you have it in you to do better. And I'm definitely going to take that.
It works 1,000% of the time. Nobody wants to hear, oh, that take was terrible. Nobody wants to hear that. We're all thinking it, but I don't have to say it.
Yeah.
What I can say is, you know what, B? I know you could do a better one. I've heard you do better. I know you can do a great one. And then she's like, all right, cool, let's go.
And it's only improving the energy in the room. I love that it's not
absolutely.
It's not subtractive.
Absolutely. Most of the time, people and artists, like I said, because they thrive so much on validation, a lot of times they don't want to hear the negative criticism. They really don't. So now you have to find a way to be productive and taking the input that you get, but you don't have to regurgitate, oh, you did terrible on that take, or yeah, I don't really like that beat that much, or nobody wants negative feedback in a creative environment.
So going from the mistakes angle to more of the tips, do you have any other additional things that can be kind of on any topic regarding starting out and whatnot, business, soft skills, anything?
You know, I think I covered the bulk of a lot of the things I usually like to say to people. One of the questions I get a lot, or a lot of the questions I get a lot, are people navigating the early parts of their career and should they do this or should they do that, or what's the best decision. I always tell people you always have to take advice from a certain place, which is I can advise you, but nobody will know what's the best decision more than you. And what you have to do in order to come up with the best decision is decide what's important to you. And when you decide what's important to you, the best decision will appear. One thing I do tell people, I think it applies universally, is your direction is more important than your speed. A lot of times people want to get to a thing quickly, and they don't realize that sometimes the quick way to get to something isn't the best way to get to something. So I'll give you an example. Young lady I was mentoring, she had an opportunity to go to LA, or actually she had an opportunity to go to Nashville to work with just, you know, this Nashville musician, wasn't super well known, but she had the opportunity to work in that studio. She wanted to go to LA to work with Pharrell, but she didn't have of course I mix a lot of Pharrell's records, but you know, it was just about, she didn't have that connect to just go start being his engineer. And that's not how it works. So I said, hey, what you should do is take the opportunity in Nashville. She was like, yeah, but I don't like country music. I don't want to live in Nashville. I said, yes, but that's the opportunity that's presenting itself. Don't go to LA chasing the thing you want. You may not even be ready. You may get that opportunity to be in front of Pharrell, but you haven't even gotten any experience to be dope. So I said, take the opportunity, go to Nashville. If it sucks, so what? I guarantee you'll learn something. You'll grow as an engineer, and the opportunity to work with Pharrell may present itself. And if it does, you'll be ready. So I always say your direction is more important than your speed.
I love it. Listen, you got to print that on some merch. Got to get it on a mug.
Absolutely, I love it.
Got to get hats. Got to get the t-shirts. I see a business venture.
I love it.
For sure. So this may be focusing a little bit on the what, but it's a new thing I'm doing on the show, and I'd love to get your take.
Okay.
One, favorite plugin in general, and kind of if you can dive into that a little bit, why? And favorite piece of outboard gear and why?
Okay. So, I don't use outboard gear. I only mix in the box. I'm completely free of any external gear. I literally just mix on my laptop. Love that because it's so convenient. I get to move around. I can travel. I can, be with my family while I'm still getting stuff done. So I have sections of things. So one of my favorite plugins just in general is the UAD Little Labs Voice of God. And I'll tell you why. It has been such a staple for me with 808s and making that low end shaping sounds. One of my favorite new plugins is the Gorilla, the Safari plugins Gorilla. And here's why. That thing, it just does a thing. It's like you pop it on there and things get meatier and louder and grittier. And I love that. And I love when you can start from a default place on a plugin and you just literally pop it on there and it makes it sound incredibly better and you don't have to go tinkering and doing a whole lot. And I love that. I love the simplicity of it. So, and I'm not saying this because we're on this podcast, but Safari plugins have been my new favorite set of gadgets. I just love them to death for so many reasons. I'm a little quirky in that, like, if I don't even like, we were talking about this, if I don't even like how a plugin looks, I can't use it. And so can you imagine? Usually when I'm working, I have all the Safari plugins up on the screen because they look so beautiful, but they sound great. So I'd say between those two have been staples on pretty much all my mixes for the past few. I just got introduced to Safari pedals maybe 4 to 5 months ago, and I saw Tizio. Tizio was doing a thing, and Tizio was Chris Brown's engineer, and he was talking about using them on something, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll try that. And I tried them out, and I was like, yes. I actually hit him too. I was like, yo, these are life right now. Like, yeah. So.
That's awesome. I love that. To kind of sum up everything we spoke about on the podcast, I always love to ask our amazing guest, can either be a piece of advice or it doesn't have to be anything you kind of want to say to the amazing viewers.
I think I want to focus back on what I've learned throughout my career, and what I've learned to hold on to throughout my career is a lot of the stuff that Rick Rubin talks about, and my good friend Guru, he talks about it a lot as well. Just service the art, man. Like, just when you're creating, when you're growing in your career, when you're working with an artist that you hate, when you're working with an artist that you love, always think about what's best for the art. What decisions am I making that is going to make this the best piece of art? I'm bringing myself to this art. Don't let all the egos and the external stuff get in your way. Just service the art, and it usually will pay off.
I love that. It's so valuable. I learned so much this episode. I really appreciate everything you shared. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here. Glad to step in. And fun fact, I do want to say this. Like I said, I learned about Safari pedals about 5 months ago. And then the first project I actually used them on and started kicking them in on was Rhapsody's album. We were still in the middle of mixing Rhapsody's album. It's called Please Don't Cry. And I because I have such a love for her and that album and that process, it was like overjoyed to then start using these plugins and loving how things were coming out. And I doubled back on mixes that I did even last year and started throwing like the flamingo reverb and some other things on things. And then the second project, I literally right after Rhapsody, was Beyonce's Cowboy Carter album. I used a couple of the plugins on there. So it's fun when I get into this. It's like you get these good omens. Like I start using the Safari plugins on Rhapsody, and then the album comes out amazing. And I start using then I use them on Beyonce's Cowboy Carter, and that's a gift in itself. And then I use them on the Usher album, and then I use them, and all these things are doing amazing, and it's great artists, and it's cool when you have that energy of a new thing that you love.
I love that. And it's also really exciting because there's always like new quirky stuff coming out. So I'm sure it's also
Yeah.
like exciting to be surprised and whatnot. That's super cool.
I can't wait to start using the camel strip. Like literally can't wait.
Hey, no, I'm excited. I'm excited for you to try out. It's definitely a fun one.